Yeah, now there's a lot of nuance in this particular area, uh, but there are a number of reasons. It could be because an individual is navigating a space that is more restrictive than they are accustomed to, which within the relational dynamic and household finances and affairs. So, one of the things that we don't discuss when we talk about personal finances is that finances are both personal and relational.
Mm.
Where we get things wrong is that we make it so personal that it's about me, but we don't always prepare individuals to say, well, how do I navigate me within the context of someone else who also has personal perceptions, ideas about money through financial socialization, what they were taught about money, either directly or indirectly. And then not only that, their internalization of those experiences. And then as we go a step further, what were their adaptive responses to these things as well? So what happens is that over time, in terms of navigating this whole notion of personal finances, we're becoming a thing as it relates to the way that we engage with money. But what doesn't happen, whether it's especially through premarital counseling and all these different things, is that we don't build this effective bridge of creating financial intimacy so that we actually fully understand not just the numbers, but the story beneath the numbers as it relates to the person that we want to build with financially. I like to think about this as a system. Okay. Oftentimes, when we talk about financial infidelity, in large part, we're talking about the individual who kept the financial secret. What we don't do is unpack the reasons why that person had to engage in secrecy to begin with. Is it because this individual had malicious intent? Is it because this individual is intentionally trying
Mm.
to deceive their partner, significant other? Honestly, when you actually unpack these things in real life with real people, it has nothing to do with those things that I mentioned.
Mm.
Um, what happens, unfortunately, though, is that, let's say, contextually, you have someone who is very type A personality that you're in a relationship with. There's another individual who's not type A personality, isn't necessarily a by the book and as structured person, right? So what typically happens is that maybe that person who's a little bit more type A comes in and kind of takes over the reins of the finances and creates this very systematic, procedural, restrictive way in which we
Mm.
engage with money. Initially, when it's just on paper and we're not acting this out in real life and I'm actually being bound by it based on my natural habits that I engage with on a day-to-day basis, it seems perfectly fine. On paper, in this setting, having this conversation, yeah, fine, cool, great, we can do that, we can do this. But that's a very myopic lens. And what happens is that the type A person with the other person who's not type A, they come to this agreement. And then what we say is, hey, we agreed to doing X without providing concessions and flexibility and variability for an individual who's not used to being restrictive. So, or restricted in the way that they engage with their finances. So what happens is that once we leave that agreement, and we're no longer looking at our financial picture myopically, but I start navigating my everyday life, I'm going to start leaning into my natural tendencies and not necessarily what I agreed to initially, right? So that person's going to start feeling restricted, all right? And then what happens is then we come back the next month, we sit at the table, type A person says, well, didn't we say we weren't going to spend more in that area?
Mhm.
So the person who's feeling more restrictive may say, well, you know what, this is restrictive and I struggle with this. And the type A person said, well, we agreed to this. Then if we don't do this, we can't achieve this goal or that goal or whatever it may be. I would appreciate it if you kept the agreement. So the person who's feeling restrictive or restricted, right? then leaves, and then maybe does the same thing, and they come back, and then type A person says the same thing. So the type A person's feeling violated because the individual who's feeling restricted is violating the boundaries. And then the individual who is feeling restricted starts feeling violated because they're not giving the space to expand the boundaries. And then ultimately, what begins to happen is now I can't come back and have a conversation about my needs being met and creating concessions within this framework of navigating not personal finance, but now relational finance to create a win-win situation for both individuals and to find that sweet spot where both individuals are getting what they need to progress financially. And if that does not happen, inevitably, said individual begins to start doing things in such a way so my partner doesn't know. So now there's no tension. They're not frustrated. They don't have to
Yeah.
know. I'm getting what I need, and it's a win-win situation. The issue that manifests itself, generally speaking, is that when this other person is paying for things out of sight, kind of out of mind, but then maybe they start, it's a slippery slope. Maybe they had the cash flow to do the things that they were wanting to do. Then eventually they don't have the cash flow. They want to do more of it. They start using a credit card and they say, oh, I'll pay it back. And then they don't pay it back. And they say, well, I'll pay that back in 2 months. And then they start using credit card and they don't. And it starts building and building and building. And then ultimately it gets to a pain point to where, this debt has gotten a lot larger than I thought, and I really need to bring this to the attention of my partner, or my partner finds out in some way. And then what happens is that somebody feels violated. That's one way in which this can happen. But it's not necessarily a person just wanting to be deceptive, is that we've created a system that doesn't promote fidelity within a relationship: trust, reciprocity, empathy, compassion, care, effective communication, flexibility. They don't have that system. So ultimately what you see people start doing is that they start navigating away or outside of that system to have their needs met because their needs aren't being met within the current system. So what I would argue, as opposed to thinking about this as a character flaw per se, let's think about this as something that there's something flawed in the system that we've created.
Mm.
How do we address the system? And by doing that, what it does is that now we're not looking at each other to identify or say there's something wrong with you or there's something wrong with me per se. Let's think about what's happening within our system and how we can come together and create a better system that works for the both of us so that we can engage in financial fidelity and not financial infidelity.